This is the Past Grand Masters History Project of the Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of Washington. My name is Very Worshipful Bud Cook, and I will be the interviewer, and our audio-video operator is Most Worshipful G. Santi Lascano. And we are honored to be here with Most Worshipful Brother Alvin W Jorgensen, our Grand Master in 2005 and 2006. First, Most Worshipful, let me thank you for taking part in this history project. It is our honor to have you here.
It's indeed my pleasure.
Question number one, what prompted you to become a Mason?
Well, I grew up in a Masonic family. My parents were both involved in Masonic organizations. In fact, my father was the master of the lodge at the same time my mother was worthy matron of Eastern Star. And as such, there were occasions, because of the travel associated with those two positions, that they sometimes couldn't find babysitters. And as a result, I became very well acquainted either with the Tyler or the Sentinel, depending on which organization met the night that they couldn't find the babysitter. And so, in effect, grew up in a Masonic lodge hall. And as a result, when I became of age, I joined DMLA and was very active in that organization. And consequently, when I turned 21, what prompted me to become a Mason was that my mother handed me a petition and said, "Here, you need to fill this out and give it to your dad," which I never disobeyed my mother, so consequently I did. And it was not that I wouldn't want to have pursued that anyway, because in DMLA in those days, it was required that all members of the advisory board be members of the Masonic fraternity. And all the men that I worked with through that experience were men that I looked up to with great respect. And consequently, when the opportunity came to be a part of that organization, there was no doubt in my mind that was what I wanted to do.
How did you come by the design of your Grand Master's pin?
Well, I'm very proud of the fact that my alma mater is Washington State University. And of course, the University of Washington, their colors are purple and gold. And of course, all our Masonic or all our Grand Lodge accoutrements are purple and gold. So I thought that we'd give some credit to the other major institution in the state of Washington. And so I wanted something that had a little crimson on it, a little gray. I also wanted something that didn't necessarily designate the particular year. That it was a pin that a Mason from this state could wear at any time, because there's no year indication on the pin. And so with my theme of great expectations, I thought it was appropriate to have a sunburst. So the square and compass superimposed over the sunburst with the phrase Washington Masons, great expectations, surrounding it over the crimson background. And of course, inside the square and compass, the G, there's a little bit of gray you can see. So we got the crimson and gray in both of them. So that was sort of how the design of the pin came about.
What was the theme for your year as Grand Master?
Well, as I mentioned, it was great expectations. It was something that resonated with me. I heard one of our past Grand Masters make a presentation one time, and he expressed that peer pressure in our fraternity is very important. And what we expect of each other causes us to either accomplish or not accomplish as we go forward. And I translated that to my own personal experience in the Masonic fraternity. When I joined the fraternity back in the mid-'60s, if I had wanted to pursue going through the line in my lodge at the time, there were expectations that were not part of our bylaws or were not part of our standing rules, but they were expectations that the lodge had for each of its members. Things such as if I wanted to become junior warden, I would need to know the lecture of the first degree and be able to confer the first degree. And sequentially, the same for the second degree and senior warden, and finally for master. Well, as it turns out, shortly after I joined the fraternity, I went into my career, my life's career, which was the Air Force, and traveled substantially, maintaining my residence or my membership in my home lodge. When I returned after a little over 26 years in the military and became active again in my home lodge, I found that the expectations had changed substantially. In that my first office in the lodge on my return was senior deacon. My second office was senior warden. And none of those previous expectations were then existent in the lodge. Well, we had, in my experience, some great visionaries towards the end of the last century. I speak most specifically of, don't want to single out specific ones, but what generated the thought with regards to the theme was the involvement of our long-range plan. And that question was posed by Most Worshipful Brother Bill Wood. And so as the story goes, he asked his other elected officers one day at an executive committee meeting, where do you think this fraternity ought to be in 10 or 15 years? And I'm told that they spent a bit of time checking for lint in their belly buttons, and finally they decided that maybe they ought to start putting together some kind of plan as to where we ought to be and what we want to do, and have a vision. And that generated the long-range planning effort that we initiated at the end of the century in 1999. And all the Grand Masters subsequent to that, Most Worshipful Brother Dick McCarty, Most Worshipful Brother Bob Van Zee, and Most Worshipful Brother Jimmy Reed were very involved in making sure that the plan was developed, first of all, and then executed. And they created the environment in which we could start to raise the expectations that we held for each other. And by surveying the fraternity, that is, going out and asking the membership that question, where do you think we ought to be in 2010, 2015? The fraternity came back and gave us some really great feedback and input. And these brothers set about to allow the plan to be developed and in turn create the environment in which we could execute. And that created a real sense of teamwork, both from the Grand Lodge level and, as I observed anyway, at the Lodge level. So as we were 5 years into it, as I became Grand Master, I thought it was appropriate that we now recognized that we now had raised some expectations and that we needed to have greater expectations. We needed to raise the level of what we expected from each other, our individual lodges, our districts, and in turn in the Grand Lodge itself.
What were some of the major goals that you wanted to pursue during your term?
Well, most of them stem from the long-range plan. But things that we did pursue was at that particular point in time, through some work of our Jurisprudence Committee and our Masonic Research and Education Committee, we were ready to offer to the fraternity, offer to the Grand Lodge, or the members of the Grand Lodge, the lodges of the jurisdiction, the combined cipher and monitor into one document. And it was to go about in different iterations, but that was something that we weren't sure that would be readily received. The goal was to get that approved, and it was, and subsequently it's been modified in different formats and things like that. So that was one goal. Another goal was we had just the November before the annual communication where I was installed, had received permission to issue, or the state had received permission to issue a Masonic license plate. And by a Masonic license plate, I mean a license plate that had a square and compass appearing on it. We set a goal that year to try and get 2,000 license plates issued so that we'd have those driving around the state. Well, we were halfway successful. We got just about 1,000. So that was one goal that we had that we pursued, and we finally achieved it in this past past couple of years, but it was not one that we achieved right on time when we wanted to that first year that it was on the street.
What were the challenges of your term?
The challenges were running as fast as I could to try and get out in front of this tidal wave that was coming behind me. And I say that not in jest. I mean, I sensed, and I continue to sense, that there is great enthusiasm from the craft. And the Masons want to do the things associated with living and achieving the vision that was identified. And it's still out there for us to achieve. And the challenge was to try and respond to all these great ideas that were coming forward and how to encompass them. We did a 5-year review of the long-range plan. It had been in effect for 5 years at the time that I was Grand Master, and our committee did a 5-year review. And the review told us that, for the most part, we were on track. That what we were doing was stuff that the fraternity still wanted to achieve and move forward with. But they did identify, and as you can imagine, in a 5-year span, there were things that we needed to adjust, to change direction on.
Yeah,
and
understandable.
in doing so, the challenge there was to communicate. And in my mind, that has been the challenge that every Grand Master faces, is communication. You would think that with the mass media communications that we have nowadays, that it would be much easier. But the message needs to be received in the same manner that it was transmitted. And that is so often so difficult. And finding ways to communicate, first of all, we can speak. The person may not be listening. We can speak, and the person may not receive the message in the same manner that we received it. I used to tell about an experience that I had at work when I was working. I received an email from one of my bosses, and I thought it was really, really succinct and to the point, and something that we needed to pass on to some other workers. So I asked him to resend it to some other folks. And I got this very terse email back from him that says, "I resent what you asked me to do." And I didn't understand that. Well, points out that face-to-face communication is much better than written communication. So I went to his office and I walked in and knocked on the door, walked in and said, "What's this all about?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "This email you sent me." He said, "What do you mean?" He says, I resent what you asked me to do. So instead of saying resent, he meant to say resent with a hyphen. And so I was miscommunicated with. It was received in a completely different manner in which it was transmitted. Those are the types of things that we encounter in the fraternity. Sometimes rumors get started and we try to correct the misinformation there. And it's sometimes so very difficult because it's being retransmitted and retransmitted. And each time there's a different iteration to it. That's the biggest challenge, I think. That's the biggest challenge I've faced. And I suspect, and I would offer that many of my predecessors and successors have faced that same challenge.
Totally agree with you on that one. What are your favorite memories as a Grand Master?
There are so many that it's tough to single out one, but I think I can single out a series of memories, and they were associated with what we called hospitality checks. And this was not an original idea. It's obviously been done by Grand Masters in the past, but we tried to do one in every district at least. And the idea was to ask each of the deputies to single out a lodge in their district that could really use a shot in the arm, if you will, by having their sidelines filled. And we would set about to try and make that happen. And we tried to do it in a covert manner. By that I mean we'd spread the word, not letting that lodge or members of that lodge know that we were going to be dropping by. and then we would meet someplace at a location in and around that lodge, and wait until the lodge was opened, and then go show up at the lodge, and then go in sequentially so that the master was continually receiving guests. And we had one visit that I remember in particular. It was up north by Bellingham. We had 82 members that showed up at that little lodge that night. Some of them came down from British Columbia, so that the word even spread up there. And that was just a tremendous evening. And of course, you can imagine in a situation like that, the junior warden sitting there getting paler and paler and paler as these folks keep showing up. And of course, we brought our own refreshments when we did something like that. But those were the neatest memories that I have, I think, because it was just Masons fraternalizing, if you will, if that's the correct term, and enjoying each other's company, enjoying a little levity, and in turn helping out at lodge, giving them maybe some enthusiasm to buck up and keep struggling because they were going to make it.
Does the man make the office, or the office make the man?
In preparation for this, I've seen these questions before, as you're aware, and I've asked that of some of my counterparts and some of my others. I maintain that the office makes the man, and I've had some counter arguments to that effect. Two things come to mind. The day that I was elected junior Grand Warden, at that particular point in time, there had been nobody else that had filed for the office. In effect, I was unopposed. And I was invited to a breakfast hosted by one of the districts, and I went to that breakfast, and I enjoyed camaraderie, and I was provided an opportunity to speak, and I did speak. And of course, by that time, my ego was way out to here, and I was really feeling great as I walked out of there. And a very senior Mason came up to me, one whom I respected a great deal. He came up to me and thanked me for coming over and for my words, and he says, "You know, Al," he said, "if you continue to be unopposed, you might almost have a 50% chance of being elected." Of course, my ego shrank immediately on that one. And then shortly after I was elected, a Grand Master came up to me, past Grand Master came up to me, and congratulated me, and he said, "Al," he said, "you can remember this. They will always respect the office." Speaking of the Brotherhood, he says, "but you're going to have to earn their respect as a man." And that resonated with me a great deal. And I think from that standpoint, he's correct. The office will be respected. And as I went through the line and observed those going before me and those who followed me, it's something that you grow into. You grow into the ability to serve in that capacity. And so the office does make the man rather than the man making the office.
Interesting. What is it like being Grand Master?
Well, it's, I would say, in the top 5 experiences of my life. Okay, you got to recognize that getting married is a pretty important thing. That was right up there, number 1. The birth of my daughters was right up there. Becoming a pilot in the Air Force was right up there, and then being Grand Master. With the marriage and the 2 daughters, those are the top 3, and being Grand Master is right in there, 4 and 5, somewhere in there. I would rank it right now, I'd say, without a doubt, it was number 4.
Who was the greatest help to you as Grand Master?
Well, I'm going to answer that question in 2 parts, if I can. In the fraternity, I can't single it out to one person, but the person that comes to mind first, and I think most Grand Masters will point to that, would be the Grand Secretary. In most cases, or in my case in particular, Right Worship Brother Dave Owen was, he came up to me the day that I was installed and said, "I'm here to serve you, boss. Just tell me what you need, and I'll do what I can to make it happen." and he never wavered from that. The others that provided the most help to me started with Most Worshipful Brother Jimmy Reed. I served as Junior Grand Warden when he was Grand Master, and then subsequent to that was Most Worshipful Brother John McNabb and Most Worshipful Brother Sat Tashiro. Those brothers provided the environment that I could begin to develop and execute what needed to be done the year that I was going to serve as Grand Master. That was so important. So many times, we talked about in lodges where it's the master's year, and so we're going to do things my way this year, and next year you can do whatever you want to do. Well, there was a concerted effort, and there was a long-range plan in effect, and these brothers provided that environment. In serving as Grand Master, the brothers that followed me, Most Worshipful Brother Chuck McQuarrie, Most Worshipful Brother Wayne Smith, and Most Worshipful Brother Doug Tucker, as elected officers, were infinitely involved in accomplishing and focused on what we were to get done that year. And so those brothers that preceded me and those that followed me were my special help in the Masonic fraternity the year that I served. On the outside the fraternity, because you need your whole environment to enable to perform. My wife, without question, was she had an unfortunate experience in that Most Worshipful Brother Sat Tashiro lost his bride before he became Grand Master. Excuse me. Yes. And so Nancy was able to do some of the things that normally a Grand Master's lady would do for Sat. And so she had some experience in that realm and brought that, of course, when I was installed. To that end, our goal was to include family activities, and those other ladies that served the Grand Lodge that year, by that I mean the wives of the Deputy Grand Master and Senior and Junior Grand Wardens were very helpful in putting together programs for our special events that would include the ladies and children if appropriate. So in encompassing a total program for Grand Lodge activities, Nancy was extremely helpful in that regards. And of course, we wanted to take the Grand Lodge to a destination location, and we chose Ocean Shores as where we wanted to hold it. And she coordinated and planned activities that were kind of unique for that particular endeavor, because we told the ladies to go fly a kite. And of course, we had expertise on the distaff side of the fraternity at that time, or not in the fraternity, but associated with the fraternity, and they had expertise, so they were able to go out and have kite flying exhibitions on the beach while they were down there. Those kind of things come to my memory. But yeah, my wife and her immediate cohorts, if you will, the other elected officers' wives were most helpful outside the fraternity.
What important Masonic changes did you see in your career?
That's the changes are somewhat subtle, but the incorporation of technology into our fraternity and the ability to use it perhaps was the biggest change that is still evolving, if you will, but thinking that we could do the lectures by electronic means, not as a matter of course, but as an instructional tool and as a last resort if some emergency or exigency came about and you couldn't do the lecture by the normal means, to have that available and the ability to do it. So the incorporation of technology, I think of our ancient brethren in the operative craft. Certainly, they must have been very receptive to improvements in technology. And why shouldn't we, as speculative Masons, be the same and endorse and welcome these technological changes that make our craft more accessible to today's society?
Interesting statement. Is there anything you want to discuss that we may not have talked about?
I've said all I need to say.
What message would you like to send to today's Masons?
I think that if I were able to communicate directly to the Masons of the jurisdiction of Washington, my message to them would be to make sure that your lodge has the benefit of your talents, your capabilities, and your enthusiasm. The building blocks of this great edifice, which is the Grand Lodge of Washington, are the individual constituent lodges. And you are the building blocks of those constituent lodges. So consequently, you are the cornerstones of the rooms that make up the great chamber, the great edifice that is the Grand Lodge. So make sure that you have given your all to your lodge and make sure that it is as successful as you want it to be, and hold very high expectations of your officers, of your members, and most importantly, of yourself.
Most worshipful, in the name of our Grand Lodge and those who are involved with this project, I wish to thank you for your participation in this oral history project. Thank you very much. Excellent.
My pleasure. You bet.